Hi everyone, hope you're all doing really well. Today I'm going to be talking through the books that I read in October. This is actually a bit of an amalgamated wrap up of October and September, just because my reading has just been all over the place. It has slowed right down the last couple of weeks, but I think I'm getting back into it now. Seem to be picking up the pace a little bit. As always, I'd love to hear from you if you've read any of these books and to continue the conversation down in the comments. So the first one, these are not in any particular order, just in the order in which they are placed next to me. And the first one was a bit of a disappointment, and I'm just I just feel so frustrated by this book. And that's Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho. So this was our pick for the Feminist Orchestra Book Club, which is a book club Jean and I run on Goodreads. So I'll leave a link to that in the description box below if you'd like to join in, although maybe after I've spoken about this book, you'll have second thoughts. This is a fantasy novel set in Regency era London, where there is magic and there are sorcerers. So Zacharias has just been made Sorcerer Royal, which is like the head of the League of Sorcerers in London, and he's the first black man to be Sorcerer Royal in an incredibly snobby upper class club of magicians and sorcerers, because his guardian Stephen bought him from a slave ship essentially as a baby and decided to, I guess, emancipate him, but really he was under his guardianship and teach him magic to prove that African people could do magic as well as white people. So he has just inherited Sorcerer Royal on his guardian's death, but there are issues in England, like there seems to be magic running out from fairyland, and then later on he meets Prunella, who is the ward of a school for gentle witches. So it's really interesting the amount of identities that are discussed in this book. So there's also the situation where magic is considered a pretty respectable profession for men, but in women it needs to be subdued. So a lot of the upper class women who are magical are sent to this school to try and repress it so they don't use it all the time. And there's also an element of classism in there where it's not very refined for gentle ladies to display magical abilities, but it's okay for working class women, if they're witches, to use their powers to say, get the dishes done quickly or get the house scrubbed. If that helps their betters, then their betters turn a blind eye to their magic, but they don't want it for their own daughters. Like, so many incredibly interesting ideas. Like, it's a great premise, and at first I was really loving it. However, as we continued, the plot got more and more messy, and scenes seemed to be happening in very strange places. So there was a point where, Zacharias, all the other magicians want to overthrow him, so he keeps having assassination attempts. There's an aspect of international diplomacy, and there's a small island in Malaysia where there are witches, and that's causing an issue with their relationship with the British government, who have a relationship with the French and Napoleon Bonaparte. There's so much going on there. And at the same time, Zacharias is trying to teach Prunella more magic because she's never been trained. I think ultimately there were far too many strands of plot, and it just seemed very strange and convenient and oddly ordered, oddly sequenced. The pacing was a bit strange. You'd get something which felt very urgent and very dangerous, and then we'd seem to take a step away from that element of the plot and just have a little magic lesson at the side, which felt quite safe and quiet and not really very dangerous at all. And as I got further through the book, I realised I also didn't really know these characters. I didn't understand them. Prunella in particular was just taking decisions which seemed kind of wacky and dangerous, like she doesn't care about anything, but I wanted to know why. Like, I didn't really understand how she felt about the actions she was taking or the situations she was in. And the same with Zacharias, really. His personality trait is just stoic, and that's kind of it. So I just felt like there wasn't enough development of who these people were and why they were doing these things, especially as the plot got more and more convoluted and ridiculous. I felt almost the plot ran away with her, because it was a great premise. I loved the world these people were in, but it just got so beyond my patience by the end of it, and I pushed myself through because it was a book for the book club. But yeah, just very disappointed. Next we have a short story collection, which is Outsiders, by various authors, but edited by Alice Slater. And this was fine. I always find short story collections very difficult when there's multiple authors in them, because you're almost certainly going to find some that you really like and some styles that you just don't gel with, and that was absolutely the case with me with this book. I found that the stories that I did like, I absolutely loved. So I really enjoyed Kirsty Logan's one. I, of course, enjoyed Jen Campbell's one that's in here. And most of the other writers were new to me, actually. But there were several which I really, really liked, especially one by Beverly Ho, which is about a woman living in Hong Kong with her grandmother, who she didn't really know because she'd been brought up in the UK, but she'd gone back to Hong Kong, and how she felt like a foreigner almost in the country of her own family. And I really liked that because it also kept to the brief of Outsiders, but it was just very well written and interesting. And some of these stories are a little bit spooky, some of them are a little bit abstract, some of them are very realistic. But my main gripe with it was that some of them I didn't really understand how it fitted the theme of Outsiders. It just felt like a bit of a random story, and I felt it didn't really obviously flow as a collection. But that's probably just my personal taste, because if there was a story that I didn't really like, I'd be like, oh, I'm getting a bit bored of this. There was one in here that I actually skipped just because I couldn't be bothered to keep reading it. It's difficult, short story as a medium, because it's this very specific skill set. It has to grab you very quickly, and convey a lot of information in not very many words. So I think it's just whether you like that author's style or not. And just for me, there were too many in here that I didn't personally enjoy. A fun one now that you might have seen me reading in my vlog in the Lake District from September, and that was A Dance with Fate by Juliet Marillier. This is a sequel to The Harp of Kings, which is part of the Warrior Bards series, and this series follows on for the Blackthorn and Grimm series, which we read before, and it's about a group of young people within this medieval fantasy island world that Juliet Marillier has created, and they are living on Swan Island, training to become warriors. And we mainly follow Leven, who's this nice red-headed woman here. And at the beginning of this book, her and her comrade Dao are having a fight, like a display fight as part of their training, and Dao gets injured and blinded, which causes a big hoo-ha. She has to go and live with his family for a year as a bondservant in penance for this wound that was inflicted. And of course, when she gets there, she finds that his family are horrific. His brother is a dreadful bully. There's all kinds of intrigue going on, which they have to unpick and unravel. And we also have her brother Brock, who is in the other world. He's in like the fairy kingdom, and he's a little bit involved in this as well. And this was fine. I didn't enjoy this as much as The Harp of Kings. And again, actually, I think this is a problem of pacing. Also, a problem with Juliet Marillier trying to make things too realistic within this fantasy world. In most of her books, like after reading this, I realised within most of her books, there's always a trial that happens. And I just feel like that's unnecessary. So, for example, right at the beginning, Leven and Dao have had this battle, and he's got her, and then we have his family turning up and being like, well, what's happened? And we have like a trial by committee, and everyone talks about, well, this happened, this is my statement. But I have read the fight, I saw the fight happen, then I have to read Leven giving her statement, and then I have to read Dao giving his statement, and then I have to read all of these other important lawyers discuss what should happen. And it just really slows the action down. And as a reader, I don't need this information again. And the same thing happens at the end, and it happens at the end at quite a number of her books, when there is a very powerful person who's been doing some bad things, and maybe Leven and Dao finds that out and brings them to trial over it. We literally, blow by blow, get the trial within this book. I have never read a fantasy book which has so many lawyers in it and so many trials, and I just think it's a real shame, because there's a lot of aspects of this book which are good, but it just really, really slows the pace down. We don't get into the action until like at least halfway through, and then everything seems to happen very quickly. And then we have a resolving trial. The conclusion goes on for ages. So it was fine. It's always fun to read within this world. It's very easy to read, but I didn't enjoy it as much as the earlier books of hers that I've read. You'll be pleased to know the next two books I absolutely loved. The first of these was Such a Fun Age by Kiley, Reid, and this was longlisted for the Booker Prize. I've heard so much about this book, and there was a lot of hype. But from my perspective, this really lived up to it. This is the story of Amira, who's a black woman babysitting for a white family. And right at the beginning of the book, there is an incident which means they ask her, like off the cuff, to take their daughter out of their house quite late at night and she takes her to a supermarket just to keep her occupied while they're dealing with stuff at home. While this happens, somebody in the shop reports her to the security guard because she's concerned that she's not the mother of the child. So it's one of these everyday racist incidents that happens, and it gets recorded on somebody's phone. This event is a catalyst, not so much for Amira's life actually, but in the lives and perspectives of the people around her. So most notably her employer, Alex, and Kelly, who is the person who filmed the event on his phone. Him and Amira start dating, and it's a very such an interesting and such a really interestingly extracted and analysed book about allyship and white people's relationship with blackness in various forms. You've got Kelly, who is very interested in dating black girls, and is very kind of #woke, and he's filmed this event and kind of is trying to push Amira to release it. You've also got Alex, who's in such a privileged position, and who has been her whole life, and really kind of wants to be friends with Amira, and just doesn't know how to go about it, and she tries to give her a lot of things because she's just a bit embarrassed about her wealth, and there's just so many intricacies within these people and how they perceive themselves within their own worlds and how they perceive their relationships with other people, but especially their relationship to Amira specifically. And I love this look at the idea of allyship, and allyship for show rather than kind of real allyship. And a lot of people are using Amira for their own gain within this book, for whatever gain that might be, trying to push her into things that she doesn't really want to do, trying to say, oh, you're just a babysitter, you need to be doing this with your life, or saying you need to release that video because then that will show the store that they can't just be racist. At one point Alex tries to get Amira to do an interview on camera, and it's really about making them feel better about what they can do for Amira rather than listening to what she actually wants and what she needs and what this event means to her in her life, which actually doesn't mean very much, because things like that happen all the time. And the fact that if she released something, it would kind of put her in a more dangerous position. She doesn't want to be notorious on the internet, and the fact that she needs money and she needs a job, she needs to babysit. And the thing that impressed me most about this book is that it manages to put all of these different aspects, the different angles, the different ideas into this book, but it doesn't feel too bogged down thematically. It doesn't feel like she's being too literary and trying to make too many points. It also just feels like a very character-driven book, which is really readable. I really got sucked into it. All of the characters are awful, but so believable and so well-rounded. And I read this in about 2 days. I just read it in one go. I read half of it one day and half of it the next day and couldn't put it down. I just had to find out how it was all going to resolve. And I love that. I think that's important in a book which is either dealing with specific topics or a book which is actually quite literary, something that can be longlisted for the Booker Prize. I think that's really important, that it's also readable and enjoyable. And I got really emotionally attached to this book. So yeah, absolutely 5 stars from me. And lastly, a book which will be very difficult to review, but I will attempt, and that is Summer by Ali Smith. This is the final book in her seasonal quartet, and I very much enjoyed it. The whole quartet for me has been such an experience. I've really loved how densely packed with themes and ideas these books are, how current they are. If you're not aware, she's been writing 1 book per year, and each book, although it deals with many different ideas and themes, tends to be set in that year. So this book opens in, I think, February 2020. She delayed the release of this book in order to write about the pandemic. That's how current it is. So it is difficult to review because this isn't really about what the characters in this book themselves are doing. It's more about the ideas they're discussing and the conversations they are having. The main family within this book is a mother and her 2 children, and the younger daughter is quite left-wing and really worried about climate change. The younger son is basically an alt-right troll online. He's very admiring of Dominic Cummings and people who manipulate general public thought, but it's also about so many other things. There's a lovely juxtaposition about people who are being detained and what it's like to be in prison. So there's characters in here who have been told they're illegally in Britain and are being detained. There's also a look back in a character who was detained during World War II because he was of German extraction, so he was put down in a summer camp in the early days of World War II. and then comparing that to lockdown and what that's like. And there's a nice line in here about like a prison is still a prison no matter how nice it is. And although these can be read in any order, I do recommend doing it that way. The plots and the characters don't follow on at all in autumn, winter and spring. And then in this book we have some characters from autumn and winter. I don't think there are any from spring, from what I can remember, but they come back in this book, which is really nice. You don't have to know anything about the links of what happened in the earlier books, but it's just nice to see. It's like a little nod. I think the problem with this book is, for me, it had so much hype. I gave 5 stars to the other 3 books. I really, really loved them, and each book I felt was building on greater foundations from the previous ones. So this one I had huge expectations for, and for me it didn't really feel like a conclusion, which on reflection does make sense because it's about now, and now hasn't concluded, that there's no kind of neat ending to this period in time which started with Brexit and is ending with who the hell knows. But it did have some nice conclusions with some of the other characters coming back, but it didn't really feel enough for me. I think I was just expecting something even greater, and it seemed to just kind of end in a bit of a strange way. But that is such a small criticism because it really is a fantastic piece of work. It's so impressive. I always enjoy reading her characters anyway, because although they are all always extremely intelligent and talk about very, very interesting and varied subjects, they're also so funny and realistic as well. And I love the relationships between the families within this book. And I think I would like to go back and read them sort of back to back. I think I'd get a lot from doing that, just to remind myself like the journey that we've been on with these books. But I think on reflection, my favourite was probably spring. I really, really enjoyed spring. Probably winter and spring. Probs my faves. So that was my October. Let me know what you've been reading. I am picking up my pace a little bit now, especially as we're getting towards the end of the year and we're not going out so much now. So I've got some real good books on my TBR that I'm looking forward to reading. Let me know what you're looking forward to reading in the next few months, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.